Hello, Editor Guy here, doing a quick intro, mostly because I forgot a lot of things during the recording that we did yesterday, so, well, here they are. Um, First of all, I neglected to mention that a lot of the photos we look at, Crystal has been minting as NFTs. You could check the show notes if you want to look at those and maybe purchase some of them. Also, Crystal is a working freelance photographer, so she's available for hire if you need a photographer. Um, she's been working for a very long time in the industry, so she would do an excellent job. Also, we are working together, Crystal and I, on a project to make a book about impact DAOs and how they operate and what they're doing and stuff. We're working with Deepa on that. Deepa Rocks on Twitter. So if you check the show notes, there is a link to the Gitcoin grants round that we're doing for that. Being a visual artist, this episode is absolutely full of visual stuff. So I would highly recommend you watch the video for this one. The audio will work, although at some point my dog interrupts the recording, which I found it cute, so I left it in, but it won't make much sense if you're just listening to the audio. So that's what happened. Anyway, thank you so much. Well, hi, welcome back to the Circum Podcast. This is episode 4. Today we're talking to Crystal Street. Hi, Crystal. You want to introduce yourself real quick? Just
Yeah.
like a quick overview?
Yeah, I'm Crystal. I'm a documentary photographer. I'm also a active participant in DAOs, and I am studying to be yogi.
Wow. Okay. Where do we start? Well, how about where I always start, which is like, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Virginia, in Richmond, so suburban life in the 80s and 90s. So, yeah,
How was that?
it was fun. Played soccer. I had a great childhood. I was very lucky. So the 80s, I look back at the 80s sometimes and cringe when I see the neon and the knee highs, but it really was lovely.
I was there. Yeah, good times. um, were you like an outdoorsy kid?
Oh yeah. As soon as yeah, if I wasn't in school, I was outside running around or playing in the woods. That was, Gen X. Mom would just say go and you would come back, after dark at dinner time. So, yeah.
Some of my favorite childhood memories are me and a friend or two just on a Saturday or Sunday, in the summer, riding our bikes around the neighborhood, jumping over fences, just stuff
Mm,
like that.
yeah.
Where'd you go to school?
Um I did went to Monacan High School and then wandered into multiple universities after that. So kind of hopped
Yeah.
around. I went to Radford University out of high school and played soccer there for 2 years, and then at age 30 went back and studied photojournalism at UNC Chapel Hill, and now I am returning at mid 40s to Naropa University. So I've been there for a year.
Soccer, huh? What position?
I was center midfield, and then in college I played
Cool,
outside, and
cool.
I hate to run, so I played the position that required the most running. So go figure. In middle school, we didn't have a girls' team for our school team, so I had to try out for the boys' team, and I made it. Um, and then in high
Huh.
school, we had a girls' team for our high school team, and anytime I would do like workshops or summer camps and stuff like that, I had to play with the boys because the girls' programs weren't developed yet. So, and in college, my coach it was Division 1, and he coached both the women and the men's team.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, he was an interesting character. Yeah.
Were there other women on the team typically, or was it just you normally?
In middle school, it was just me.
Huh.
That was awkward. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and then in college we had a women's team. So, but the coach
Right.
just coached both. So,
Right. Right. No, I gotcha. So you originally went to school for like recreational stuff?
Hmm. Yeah. I started elementary education and realized I had to stay in one place. I was like, well, that's not going to work. So I chose outdoor recreation. My first real job was a sea kayak tour guide. So,
Was that because you were taking your hobby and like you're like, I want to do this all day? Or was it
kind
just
of.
because like, I don't know, this seems like a good job?
It was probably a little bit of both. I mean, I think originally I was drawn to it because of therapeutic recreation. So it kind of had that educational element, and I was really into psychology, and it allowed me to help people relax through recreation. And being an athlete, it was just a natural transition. Um, and I've just always been. I began listening to the Grateful Dead when I was 18 and got into counterculture literature, 18 and 19, and then I was pretty well steeped in it. So I needed everything to be unconventional, and outdoor recreation is about as unconventional as you could get in a college framework in the 90s. So
Yeah, probably. So sea kayaking, like on the Atlantic? Like where were you?
I learned on the New River to whitewater kayak, and I was terrible at it. I had this fear of being stuck underwater. I was like, well, this isn't going to work. So then I got into sea kayaking, and I paddled on the Outer Banks. So I was mostly in the Nags Head area, and then I would do tours like in the marshes and in the Maritime Forest. I got stuck as the guide for the snake tour, which was really awful. So
Like you were showing people actual snakes or
yeah,
like
like it was in a maritime forest, and it was just filled with water moccasins, and I hated snakes. I was like, well, this will get me past my fear of snakes. It did not. So just more terrified of them.
huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. So during this whole time were you I imagine you were into taking photos as a hobby?
Yeah, when I was 10, I asked my dad for a camera. He thought it was a phase, so he took me to the local camera shop and bought a real SLR camera. It was a AE1 from it was 1976 was the year it was made. And he wanted it, so I think he just bought it for himself. And he was like, "Oh, she'll get tired of it," and it never did. I still shoot with it. That we have this photo of I think it was probably 2 years later. I was like 12 or 13, and we're on family vacation, and my dad was taking a picture with it, and I'm just standing there glaring at him like, "Give me my camera back." So in high school, I worked. I took classes in the darkroom, so I learned how to process film, make my own prints. And then in college at Radford, I ran the university darkroom. So I just on the side took fine art classes. It wasn't a major. I don't know why no one ever said, "Hey, go major in this." They just didn't. So I started shooting professionally. My first professional gig. This is awful was with that AE1 camera. So it's all manual. It's a very slow camera. I was shooting film and I would go to fraternities, and I'm not a fraternity sorority person. I would go to fraternity parties and I would do grip and grin shots where you hold the camera and they just smile at you. I'm like, this is awful. So
Huh.
then I found a
I've never
job.
heard of this.
What's that?
I've never heard of this.
Oh yeah, it was late 90s. And then I got a job. I saw an ad in the paper for a local for a regional newspaper. They needed a staff photographer. So I just went there with my pitiful little portfolio, and they hired me $6 an hour. So that's how I got into photojournalism.
Nice.
Yeah.
So as someone who's done both, like how important is the sort of physical analog nature of photography to you? Because I know a lot of people are really attached to that as part of the process.
Hmm. For me, it's if I didn't move around so much, if I wasn't nomadic, I would probably still be shooting film. I do still shoot medium format film. I think from a process perspective, I'm so grateful that I learned on that because I had to tell a story in one roll. I had 36 frames. So I had to be very deliberate about how I was telling that story. Now, when I worked at a newspaper, I had unlimited film, so I could be sloppy, but I still had to be concise at some point. And also, I'm terrible at following directions, and they're just really bad at it. So, um, and back then when I was shooting on film, I would come back from sports events at the newspaper, and my editor would be like, "There's barely anything on this negative. Do you know how to shoot in low light?" I'm like, "Well, apparently not, because you're looking at it." So then I really had to like up my game because there's only so much you can do. I mean, when I was working at that newspaper, we got Photoshop 4, and I went to scan a
Whoa.
negative, and I ran down to the darkroom because I was skeptical. I'm like, this isn't right. So I started scanning the negative, ran to the darkroom, made the print, came back, and it was still scanning the negative. I was like, oh, this technology is terrible. You know, here we are.
I mean, it was.
It was, yeah.
So, how much do you think like a modern photo? I mean, you learned a certain way,
Mhm.
but I imagine someone that came up after you and learned on digital equipment might have a bit more of a spray and pray sort of philosophy when it comes to. Uh, I mean, that's kind of how I operate. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take 40 of these, and one of them will be good.
Um, actually, I think it's really good that that can happen. When I was
Right.
learning on film, because I had unlimited when I was at the newspaper, my mentors were like, shoot as much as possible. That's how you get better. So from that perspective, I think it's great. From a data management and editing perspective, drives me bonkers. That's why I try not to just gun it when I'm shooting something. I don't just hold the shutter down unless it's really good action and I know that it's worth, editing 100 photos of one scene. So
So, what do you shoot on now?
I just have a 6D Canon. I'm a Canon girl. I bought it like 4 or 5 years ago just on a whim because my niece was born. I'm like, I need to take pictures of this adorable little human with a real camera. So I shoot with that. I have a Mamiya 645, I think, medium format, and then some old Canons. I think eventually I'm going to upgrade my equipment this year to some newer Canons, or I do like the rangefinder, the small. I haven't really worked with a film rangefinder, but I do. I shoot mostly 28 millimeter lens fixed, so I do like a very simple, small camera kit. I'm working for my university as their photographer, so I kind of have to up my gear game soon. So
Hopefully, they will help you with that.
yes, they will. Hopefully,
Because you know as well as anyone that stuff's super expensive.
yeah, it is. That's what I love about the film. I mean, I can use a camera that's as old as I am, and it works great. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Sometimes I feel bad about my camera, which you're, like watching me on right now, but it's great. Like it's just 7 years old. Like it's fine. But
Exactly.
I should say it's a Lumix G7.
Oh, nice. I like the Lumix.
Um, Simple little,
Mhm.
4K camera. But so you got a job at $6 an hour. How'd that go?
It was fun. I got to shoot. So we covered Virginia Tech and Radford. So I got to cover sports. I got to learn, and this was late '90s. So and we were smaller schools. So I got to shoot big events, but had full access and didn't have to fight for that access. Got to shoot Dave Matthews Band when he did his first tour with Tim Reynolds, and I was a huge
Oh
Dave
wow.
fan. And because it was such a small paper, they just let me sit in the pit the whole time for the whole concert. I'm like, oh, why would anyone buy a ticket and sit in a seat after this? So yeah, so it was great. And because it was such a small paper, there was a lot of flexibility. I mean, they just were like, just do it. So it was lovely.
Yeah, Dave Matthews actually lives up here. Well, at least some of the time.
Oh yeah, I photographed him a
Um,
lot. I figured out how to get press passes all through my 20s. So I would go when they got really big. I would go sit in the pit and photograph. He's one of my favorites to photograph because he's so passionate. Like the first time I ever saw him was when I lived on the Outer Banks, and it was in a bar, and there was only like 10 people in the bar, and I was like, "Who is this band?" And they were playing like they were in front of a huge audience. So then later, and actually they came back to our house and party, but I was 18, so I was already asleep. Like, oh, bummer. But and then when I photographed them, like I guess it was probably 7 or 8 years later, they were playing in Norfolk in front of tens of thousands of people, and they play the same exact way, same level of passion, same level of intensity. I'm like, that's artistry. So when you can photograph and document that, it's an interaction between you and the artist. It's so much fun. It's an absolute blast.
awesome. Yeah. So how long did you stay at the paper?
Oh, I was only there for 2 years. My editor, I started going to doing more formal training in photojournalism with National Press Photographers Association at workshops, and I'd come back and want to do like real documentary style stuff. And my editor was like, "I don't want any of that frou frou shit." I'm like, "Okay, this isn't gonna last long." so, so then I just kind of went out on my own and started working in recreation and mostly on the Outer Banks and also in the Rockies in the wintertime. And then I would do freelance work with my camera wherever I could find it, just random freelance. It's fun.
If I magically became a photojournalist but had no idea how to do it, what would your like major tips be going
Mm.
into it? Like what's the hard and fast like, oh my god, you have 5 minutes to get some photos. You have no idea what you're doing. Just do these things.
I'm going to tap into my mentor's advice on this one.
Okay.
It's better to ask forgiveness than it is permission. Um,
Uh,
don't rely on your zoom lens. So if you're not, and this is a Robert Capa quote, I think, if your images aren't good enough, you're not close enough. Um, so put that wide angle on and stick yourself right in the middle of the action and just shoot. Um, and just be human about it. Don't be a vulture about it. Engage with the subject so that there's an energetic exchange between the two of you and your images will be better. And the more time you spend with someone in a setting, the more they're going to trust you and open up to you and allow you into their world. You're just there to document their story. Your camera just happens to be your tool.
when you said uh, ask for forgiveness, not permission, I assumed you meant just to like sort of creep up on someone and just explode your camera in their face.
I had issue with that a lot. I don't like that,
Okay.
but I do see that it works. I think it's easier for men to do than women. For street photography, I don't think it's a good idea because of the age we live in. Um,
Right.
but in certain situations, get the shot, and then I mean you'll know when you're in that situation, like at a protest. It's better to just to go in, get the shot, and then just don't ask. But if
Right.
you're on the street and there's somebody having an intimate moment and you want to photograph it, that's a different conversation. I mean, it makes me uncomfortable to see all of the street photography in the NFT world right now because it does feel very voyeuristic. I would be angry if somebody minted a picture of me and put it on the blockchain and I didn't know it, you know?
I mean, I imagine it's all about mindset, right? If you go to a protest, you assume you're going to be photographed. Whereas if you're crying on a corner, you don't assume you're going to be photographed. Yeah, for sure. So let's uh, let's talk about some of your freelance projects,
Mm.
if it's okay. If you are listening to the audio version of this, now would be a great time to fire up the video version because I'm going to put like a lot of these photos in the video version. If not, that's cool. There'll be links in the description to check them out. Um, so this first one is actually from a trip you did to Nepal in 2006. It looks like. You want to tell us about this one?
Yeah. Yeah. In 2006, I had a fellowship with UNC. It was a class of 1938 fellowship, and I was able to go to India and Nepal. I did two separate projects. In Nepal, I did some work with a human rights news organization and had access to document whatever. And I was studying security demographics in my political science classes. So I was documenting different aspects of that concept throughout Nepal because they were at the end of their Maoist conflict, which had gone on for a decade. So I went out to this village in the middle of nowhere. And my editor sent me to this woman named Asita, and that's the woman in the photo. And I spent the day with her. I made the editors leave. I'm like, I don't want anyone here. And her story was that she had her husband was the local mail carrier, and he was killed by the Nepalese army because they thought he was a rebel, but he was just walking home from work one day. So it left her and her sons with no source of income. So in that photo, she's working in the rice fields. And that's what she does during the day. So I spent the day with her and just documented her life, really, just for that one day.
Did you do a lot of travel for freelance stuff or other photojournalism jobs?
Um, a little bit. I did some freelance work in Indonesia for a photographer. I did the audio component of a multimedia project. And that was for, I think, the World Bank and Junior Achievement. Um, And then I did multiple grants, mostly through my time at UNC. Grant money. I'm like, why is no one taking advantage of this grant money? Y'all undergrads were like, eh. I'm like, come on, guys. So I went to the Middle East, did some stories in Palestine and Israel, and then I also had funding through UNC as a producer for a project for Special Olympics. So I got to go to Egypt and take a colleague over there, and we documented Special Olympians in Cairo. Um, and then the work I did in India and Nepal, that was also grant funded.
Speaking of India, here are some of these images from that collection. You want to go through these real quick?
Yeah, I don't have my browser up, but I can pretty much memorize them anyway. So I went to Dharamsala and McLeod in the Himalayas in India, and the project was to document the cultural preservation of the Tibetan and exile community. And I was kind of exploring, how diasporas, when they leave their homeland, how do they preserve their community? How do they preserve their culture, their heritage in a country where they don't have passports and it's not their home country. Very interesting culture because they stayed intact for the most part. When the culture fled over to India, the Tibetans brought a lot, whatever they could bring over the mountains. They brought it with them. But when they got to India, they created their own government. They created their own infrastructure. So I just went and documented that. And it was my first international travel abroad. I'd never been abroad, so I just went to India by myself, and it was a hot mess. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
trial by fire. Um, the project was great though, and it was interesting because that was my first introduction to Tibetan Buddhism in person. I'd been exposed to it through the Grateful Dead and through their iconography about 10 years prior, but never seen it. But I was always an outsider, so I just kind of documented. And I got to photograph the Dalai Lama, which was cute. He's so tiny. Um, so it was interesting to document as an outsider in such a deep culture. I'm excited to go back in the future and do it from the inside now, having studied Tibetan Buddhism in the way that I am.
One of these especially striking images is this. It looks like a man is working on some like brass goblets or candle
Oh yeah,
holders.
yes.
What's going on there?
So those are butter lamps. It was a nun at the Dalai Lama's temple, and this is a great. This loops back to what you asked about earlier about asking permission. So I just took that photo. This is one of the few times where I did not ask permission, and I took the photo, and then I got yelled at. She yelled at me. She's like, "No." I'm like, "Oh, geez," and I was mortified. I was like, "Oh, I'm a jerk." But it was a good photo, and the
It's a great
lamps.
photo.
Thank you. They're lit to send peace and light out into the world. So they light them every day. So the next time, so I got some other photos, and then after that, I had to remind myself where I was. So I always would kind of, even though I didn't speak the language, I would gesture to the camera first before I took the photo in that type of a setting, and then people were yes or no. So.
So there's this other image in this collection where it's like the focus is on in the foreground is this rock with like symbols on it,
Mhm,
and in the background you see the Tibetan prayer flags.
mhm. So that was around the Dalai Lama's temple. There's a trail that people walk every day, and they turn the prayer wheels. And then throughout, there's prayer flags, and then the stones. I don't understand Tibetan. One of these days, I'm going to learn it. One of my professors teaches it. Um, but it's a prayer. It's a Tibetan prayer.
Gotcha. I guess I could have seen that coming. So also you've done a lot of protest photography, especially in the last 5 or 10 years. What is your typical approach to protest photography? Like, I imagine it would be easy to get a lot of like impersonal photos of that sign and head milieu that we
Yeah.
all know of like what a protest looks like. But like, what's your goal when you go out to photograph a protest?
My goal is really, and this is going to sound cliche, but it's just to bear witness. I usually go document issues that get my panties all twisted when I'm on the Twitters. And then I just want to see, you know, what is the dialogue? What is the energy? What is the protest look like? Sometimes I just like, I think next weekend I'm going to go, or this coming weekend, I'm going to go to some gun march protests here in Myrtle Beach in the South, where it's very polarized. So that should be interesting. I might drive to Charleston that would have a bigger audience just so I can see what is the dialogue back and forth. Sometimes it's not a back and forth. Sometimes it's just one side is there. I have my biases. It's one of the reasons I'm not a journalist now. Um, but my approach is really just to, I guess the last one that I did, the last big one that I did was the family separation protest in 2018, and I'd been watching that issue on, in in national media and on Twitter for a while, and it just got to the point where I'm like, I can't take this anymore. So I flew up to Baltimore and then stayed at a hostel, and then I've been trained in by some local hackers in information security. So left. I didn't want to deal with burner phones, so I just left all the devices except for the camera in the hostel, and then took the train with cash into the city. And I kind of wanted to just test out if I had the chops to do personal operational security as a journalist. Still, not that I ever did it real well before, but now in this digital age. Um, so that was kind of in the back of my mind. But then also just when I got to the protest, basically went to where all the people are. And for some reason, it's like a moth to the flame. Wherever there's conflict, I just kind of go right into that conflict, and that's usually where the most interesting images are. And usually that's where the story is.
So at what point did you sort of get into yoga? Like, is that a recent thing or?
I guess probably about 8 or 9 years ago, I started. I was living down here in Myrtle Beach, doing a lot of client work, mostly web production. And I was in front of the computer all day, and I was just like, oh, this isn't healthy. And the community down here is not really my jam. So I was like, I need to find my people. So I got a unlimited yoga pass to one of the more popular studios in town, but it's still very like local and organic. And I just went there every day for lunch. That was my lunch hour. I was like, I'm just going to go do yoga every day, and then hopefully something will, I don't know, click. Um, Eventually it did. So that's how it started.
Yeah, I do yoga,
Nice.
but I have the flexibility of like a door frame. So I always worry, like, because I'll look at other students in the yoga class and be like, wow, that's so amazing that they can do that. And I always worry that like they think I'm creeping on them or something, but I'm just like so impressed. Like, can you do wheel?
Oh no, I no, I have bad shoulders from wakeboarding. No, there's definitely
Okay.
there are boundaries with my body now at this age. It's like, are you serious right now? I just went through the yoga teacher training, and I wasn't the oldest one in the class, but most of the class was young. So I do the same. Like when they get into wheel, I just sit there and watch. I'm like, that's fantastic. I'm definitely not doing it, but amazing that you are. And my professor always says those that are blessed with stiffness. So if you have that, like those who are like, I'm very flexible, so I don't have to struggle to get into a pose. But that's where the real learning happens is when you're in the pose and you have that stiffness and that pain and good pain, then that's where the learning happens and that's where the expansion happens. So you can look at it like that.
I mean, I'm years away from getting into the pose. Like, okay, when you're in downward dog, do your heels
Mhm.
touch the ground?
Yeah.
Okay, see, I've got like 5 inches of like sky in between my heel and the ground in downward dog. Um, I cannot do crow. I bet you could do crow.
Sometimes, but every once in a while I just do a face plant. Yeah, sometimes I just like I just lose confidence and I just face plant. So it's like, oh, but it's not about like it really isn't about getting into the pose. And that for me has been the big learning thing this year is giving myself permission to be a messy yogi. I am a hot mess on the yoga mat, and I am cool with it. And when I teach a class now, I'm like, we're all gonna be a hot mess together because it's not about your heels touching the ground. It's just about showing up on the mat.
Yeah, and of course that's what my instructors will say too. You know, no one's ever like, "Wow, you suck." But you know, you want to progress, right? Like I want to get my heels 4 inches off the ground rather than five someday.
Yeah, and you will
um,
eventually.
the I don't know. I'm a bit of a meathead in the gym. I do too much weightlifting and not enough stuff like yoga. But my aching back and stuff tells me that I should really mix things up a bit more.
Yeah, it's a good balance. I did Muay Thai, purple belt in Muay Thai, and then I also did jujitsu and yoga at the same time, and it was really fun. Like I like floating in between those two worlds. I'm thinking about getting back into jujitsu this fall. I don't know. We'll see.
like you said, you've recently been back to like is the goal to teach yoga
I didn't
like
really
as a
have a
source of
goal.
income?
No.
No.
I don't
Okay.
make much money. I didn't really have a goal. It was just more that this is going to sound weird, but this is actually how I ended up in journalism school too. 2004 midterms. It was 2004 midterms when Bush and Cheney got reelected. I was in a coffee shop the next day. I was like, "Damn it! What am I going to do? Like, I go to Canada, or I could get involved." So I applied to journalism school. I got involved. Same thing in 2020. I'm in the winters. I go hang out in the desert, and my family has an RV park, and I stay at this old RV, and I'm laying in the bed in the RV in the park, and I'm like, oh, and I'm trying not to doom scroll. It's like 2 a.m. and I know the election's not going to be resolved for weeks, and I'm like, what am I going to do now? Like, if it goes either, like, what's next? And the only thing that popped into my head was yoga, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. So then the next day, I'm like, all right, I gotta. Whenever I call it the yoga whisper, when I'm on the yoga mat or in that quiet moment, there's space. If just like one word pops out, then that is something I need to like pursue or just at least explore. So I started looking at schools again. There really aren't any that teach. There's maybe two or three that allow yoga as an undergrad or as a a curriculum in an academic setting. And I really need frameworks. I need deadlines. I need to be told it's due on this date or it does not get done. So I was like, well, let me learn this in the deepest way I could possibly learn it. So, so I found, and I already knew of Naropa, but they at the time that I had first looked at it was for creative writing, and they had since started a yoga program. So.
You ever notice how some yoga teachers, I don't know why. Maybe you help me out with this a little bit. Some of them put you in this sort of, like it's you they get you out of your head and you're really focusing on your breath and you're really just sort of like you're not thinking about your movements, you're just kind of doing them and you're just kind of like putty in their hands.
Mhm.
Have you noticed that? Like, and like, why do you think some teachers like get you there and others don't?
I think the teachers that get you there have embodied yoga as a lifestyle, as a way to live, because it's not just physical postures. There's 8 limbs of yoga, and the physical postures are just one limb. And really, the way that they are designed, it's designed to quiet the mind and get you into a meditative state so that at the end of your practice, you can sit in meditation and the body isn't distracted, so that the mind is then able to be released in theory, and there's space through breath and through sitting so that you can have space to just be. And that's really it's I have my stack of books. It's like this is ancient Patanjali. It's from like thousands of years ago, and that's the point. So the yoga instructor that can do that, they have embodied their practice.
Do you also do like uh, meditation and such?
I do. It's a hot mess, just like my yoga, but I do it every day. It's whew, that's messy, and that's the way it's supposed to be. I think we have this stigma around meditation where you have to sit still for 20 minutes every day, and some days you just don't, and the entire time your mind's just going to be monkey mind bouncing around. But the whole point is to just get that tiny, like 1 or 2 seconds in there of space. And then what I've found with my practice is that if I'm able to sit still, later in the day, my mind isn't as wild and crazy, which is really important when we get into DAOs and the blockchain and the tech world that we function in. Being able to find stillness at some point in the day, I think allows us to deal with that type of an environment much easier, or at least with our sanity intact.
Yeah, I have tried meditating, but like you say, it's kind of like it looks like I'm just sitting there, but it's like I'm fighting the whole time
Yeah,
with myself,
that's the
and
point.
it's not chill.
No,
It's
it's
not
never
chill.
chill. Yeah, and that's
It's
that's how
like
it works.
I think I read a book about it, and a guy described it as like this. You're just like doing these little circles with yourself. Like you're saying you're trying to clear your mind, then you fail. Then you hopefully don't admonish yourself for it, and then you just start over, and then that just goes and go. You could probably run a generator off of it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's the whole point. It could just be like that the whole time. Yeah.
and it never gets easier. Like
Oh, it definitely gets easier, and then at some point, you can step out of that. It's called a samskara, is that cycle where the mind just keeps going in these narratives that play over and over and again. The more you meditate in any way and have any kind of practice that's regular, the more you can recognize that samskara, that pattern, and break it faster. So you might still have monkey mind, your mind still might be bouncing, but you're not going to dwell on the narrative that your mind is producing. You're just going to kind of wave at it as it floats on by. You say, I see you, I recognize you, you can go now. Same thing with fears and anxiety. Like sometimes in the morning when you wake up, you just got, the fear and the anxiety dialogue, that narrative just starts going and going. So being able to say, okay, I see your fears. Now please get in the back seat because I have to drive this car forward. And then you can just let it, keep it behind you. And that's really what it all is about, is not so much emptying the mind, but controlling the mind in that way, and not in a domineering type of thing, but just being able to understand your mind better and then give it some structure and release those perpetual narratives that we stay in.
Yeah, almost to like have a third person's perspective on your own mind, like
Mm-hmm.
like observing it from like a objective point off to the side.
Exactly.
So when did you start digital nomading?
2009. So I moved
Wow.
down after UNC. I moved down to the beach in South Carolina, and Lehman Brothers tanked 3 weeks after I moved. So all of the work that I had lined up evaporated. I was like, oh my god. So that year I went back to bartending, and I read books by Chris Guillebeau, The Art of Nonconformity, and that's when Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Work Week came out. And I was like, okay, those both make a lot of sense to me. So I put everything in my mom's garage. I mean, I'm a minimalist for the most part, except for my books and my rocks. I have a rock collection. I had a side hustle selling
The
rocks. It's a whole other podcast. So,
books and rocks, the two essential things.
right? So, put everything in the garage and then just took off. And I didn't bring the cameras. Like, I just want to go to California. I bought a one-way ticket. I was going to go to Tahoe and ski for the winter. Ended up in Berkeley and visiting friends, and just hopped on the train and just started wandering. And then I was at a friend's house about 3 weeks later. I'm like, all right, if we're going to give this whole Tim Ferriss thing a whirl, we do need income at some point. So I started applying for jobs, and it's when content mills weren't really a thing yet. So I got a job at a content mill, and I was like, oh, I can just write articles. And so I wrote they're still out there, like how to use Photoshop or how to crop a photo. Like I would just pump them out in my RV in the desert, and then I didn't have to bartend. I'm like, oh, this is great. So that's how it started.
Do you ever feel like lonely on the road, or is it the opposite?
It's both. I mean, I think there's this it's holding space for both. So there's definitely times where I'm lonely. Um, and I think that's why where Twitter really came into it in the beginning. Um, Travel Twitter was actually really cool, like in 2010, 2011. You could still have, like, it wasn't the dumpster fire it is now. So I would connect with people that were also nomads, and then we would meet up in real life. So that allowed me to at least go online and find some connection. Um, but I began when I began doing digital nomad as a lifestyle. Sorry, my dog is all the noises. I would go to coffee shops in the morning, and that was like my way to ground in a community and not feel lonely. If I'm around humanity, I'm an introvert. So if I'm around humanity and can see it, even if people drive me bonkers, it still gives me a sense of connection and belonging, even if it's not my community. Not having my own community was definitely an issue, and that was one of the reasons I chose the school that I chose, is that it has a spiritual community as its component. I mean, that's what fuels it. So that's been interesting to explore now. But I find that when I'm on the road, my creativity is way better than when I'm in one place. Just being an unknown, being lonely, being in unknown places, just taps into the creative side in a way that when I'm in familiarity and in routine, I just don't get it. So
Yeah, definitely for me, like when I'm somewhere where it's available to me to sort of like build a little routine nest, that doesn't help my creativity at all. Like, because that's natural for me, is to sort of like set everything up just how I want it. Like, oh, I don't like this desk. I want a different desk. Okay, this one's perfect. Like stuff like that. And then eventually it's all just right. And like how I would describe it is like you're a pool ball on the pool table and nothing is bumping into you. So you just kind of sit there. Um, so you don't get any new perspectives, new ideas. You don't get pushed out of your comfort zone.
I think too that some humans are meant to just roam. Like yogis are meant to just wander and spread their yoga around. And this period right now, I'm in a quiet space. I'm waiting for my dog is 10 and a half. So, she's at the end. We're at the end of our chapter together. So we still have a few more years to write it. But in that time, I'm like, let me, work on myself more since I can be in one place. And then once that time has passed, then it's time to go back out into the world with a different perspective. And I think that's kind of, as we age, it's kind of nice to be able to press pause on life and then go find and go back out in the world and bring what you've learned out into the world again and then just witness it from a different perspective.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So at what point did you first notice crypto stuff?
I first noticed, I think it was like 2012. I was trying to figure out how to email my colleagues. Like one of my journalism colleagues lives in Pakistan. Some others work throughout the Middle East. And I was like, y'all need to stop Gmailing me because this Gmail thing is not safe. And so I explored Bitmessage, which was, I think it was peer to peer encrypted, and it ran on blockchain technology, I think. I'm pretty sure it did. Um, so that was my first exposure to it. I figured it out, but nobody else could. So I was just emailing myself. Like, well, this isn't going to work. And then some bloggers that I followed from the digital nomad space were getting into cryptocurrencies um, around the same time. So I just kind of watched their blog posts about it, and I was just curious. And then when I was in Myrtle Beach and joined that hackerspace, they were into it, and they were just playing with it, because they could stand up a node, and then mine Bitcoin. Um, and then I think they mined a bunch of Dogecoin. And so I would just sit in that space. I like being the dumbest one in the room. And I was the dumbest one in that room. And they were very gracious and taught me everything that I wanted to know. So we had one workshop where the head of the community taught us how to make our own cryptocurrency. So I think he forked a chain. I think it might have been at the time the Ant chain, which later became Neo. Forked it, we played with it, made our own coins, and then we just kind of riffed on what that would look like in a societal perspective. But then we learned Neo blockchain, and then they taught me how to trade. So they taught me how to log into, I think it was KuCoin at the time, log into KuCoin, and I watched him. He's like, I made $2,000 while I was sitting here explaining this to you. I'm like, okay, you got to explain it to me again like I'm 5 because I need to learn this. So he did, sent me some coins. I think he sent me some Ethereum. They taught me how to do CryptoKitties. And then they ended up starting a company. We basically recreated, it felt like HBO Silicon Valley. We just kind of ran with it for like a year or two. Oh, it was a hot mess. So that was how I got into, and the technology that we were building, not we, I was hired to translate the humans. That was my job. Um, and the devs were building NFT technology. So it was early NFT generative technology on the Neo blockchain, and also smart contracts and how to deploy or how to build the wallet for that chain. And we would go to stuff with City of Zion. So I got to sit in these open source communities and just listen and again be the dumbest one in the room. And I was just floored. Like, oh, I have to learn this. So that's how it started.
I'm learning recently that the best place to be is the dumbest and oldest person in the room.
Yes.
If you are the smartest and youngest person in the room, you fucked up.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was about when was that?
That was 2017, 2018. And then I got out of it.
Sure.
That's when I went to go play with rocks. I was like, I'm done with tech. I need a break. So I started playing with rocks.
That's the exact opposite of tech.
Yes. It's like I want to run in the other direction right now for a while, guys. And then I got back into it. I started paying attention when the market tanked in the pandemic. And I always paid attention to the market because I was just curious. So I started paying attention to the crypto market again then. and I still had just a handful of coins. So then I watched as it went from 3,000 all the way back up. I was like, oh wow, okay, let's get back into this because this is a movement. And then Gary Vaynerchuk, who I study for my client stuff, he started talking heavily about NFTs, and anything he talks about, I'm like, oh, he's about to kick this mainstream. So I was like, let me pay attention to NFTs again because obviously the tech has evolved a lot since I was in it. And then in Clubhouse came on board. So I was in a Clubhouse room and somebody sent me an invite. So I'm poking around to find some topic that I knew something about so I could at least understand what they were talking about. And there was a Crypto Babes, I think it was called Crypto Babes or something, room. So I hopped in. I was like, let's see what these women are talking about. And there was women from all over the world, mostly new to crypto, and they were talking about creating generational wealth with Bitcoin. And I jumped into the conversation, shared the knowledge that I knew, and then I was like, here I am, I already know this stuff, and I'm not even participating. And here are these women who are creating generational wealth for the first time in their lives and in their lineage with this technology, and they don't even know it. Like, I need to pay attention again. So then I got active in the community, different communities, NFTs, and then started working with Unlock Protocol in July of last year. So, and then I was in it.
Yeah, you want to give us a quick elevator pitch of Unlock Protocol?
Yeah, it's great. I don't work there anymore, but
Okay.
it is an amazing protocol. So it is basically, it puts membership functionality into NFTs. So you can create an NFT through Unlock, and it's completely open source. It's a protocol, not a platform. So you own everything. It just helps you create the smart contract, essentially. And the lock can have parameters on it, like time and quantity. And then when somebody purchases a key to that lock, they get the NFT. So you attach an image to the lock. And then when somebody purchases a key, they then have that NFT in their wallet. And then you can put that NFT as like a lock on anything that will read and interact with it, like Discord. And then the person that has that key can enter your Discord with their NFT. And it's a mission driven company. The founder's amazing, very kind, very brilliant, and the team just a great team. I mean, I was so busy with school, I just couldn't handle both. Um, but they do an amazing job, and they're a DAO also. So it's a very small team, and then they're run by a DAO as well. So that was fascinating because I was the community manager, so I got to really participate in when the DAO came online, the governance aspect of that, the tokenomics. It was very fascinating to see that from the inside out and figure out how to navigate that landscape.
It seems like you're in a couple other DAOs too. You want to tell us about those, like Journo DAO and how do I say that? Sangha DAO?
Sangha DAO.
Sangha.
Sangha DAO is kind of new to me. It's Sangha is a Buddhist community, and I saw their talk at ETH Denver at the Shelling Point this past year, and I was like, "Ooh, Buddhist and blockchain." My academic project I'm going to do in the fall will have to explain blockchain to Buddhists. I'm like, "Well, I need to pay attention right here." Because he's already figured this out. And actually, so I joined their server. It's not super active, so I'm not really active in it. I just kind of hop in and say hi sometimes. But the founder actually went to my university. And we study in my Buddhism and modernity class this past semester, we studied how virtual worlds and communities can help support Buddhism and its, evolution into modernity. So that was one of the reasons I kind of popped in there. Journalism DAO is I joined them about a month and a half ago and just kind of stuck myself right in the middle of it. And it's revitalized my energy for DAOs. I was a little overwhelmed with the DAO world prior to finding them. Most DAOs that I hop into are so big and massive and overwhelming that I don't know how to participate or where to even start. And then Journo DAO's mission is right in alignment with my own. So, and here's, a handful of guys that are my age and former journalists, and some are active journalists now, and they're just there to figure out how to take this technology and help bring sustainability into media again. And I could do that all day long. So it's been amazing to work with them.
Yeah, I feel like what you said about the DAO space is 100% true for me. Like I feel it's almost like you're watching a river and there are a bunch of logs in the river and you're like they're all just going by and you're just like, oh God. And you just have to kind of jump on one of the logs.
Exactly. That's a great way. Let's
And
like
then
that game. It's like Frogger. Like you're kind of hopping along and yeah.
yes, exactly. Or you'll get run over by a car if you don't jump on a log, basically.
Yeah.
I haven't actually quite jumped on a log myself, but like that feeling of sort of like the fire hose blasting your face off kind of goes away once you sort of uh, choose some paths to walk down. That's three mixed metaphors right there.
I
Um,
like it. It's true though. Like you do have to find that, at least for me, it's the mission driven aspect. That was the same with Unlock. Like their mission was in alignment with mine. I'm like, this I can get into. Same with Journo Doubt. The mission is in complete alignment. So I could give it all of my energy, you know. I could just do it all day long.
right. But from talking to people that are very deep into one DAO or another, they say they it's easy to lose touch. Which of course it is. Like you're busy doing this one thing, everyone else is doing stuff still, and like you don't have time to listen to 10 podcasts a week and read 20 articles and right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a stack of things that I need to read. And this is where I bring the yoga into it. It's like at the end of the day, you know, we're just messy humans. So I'll just do what I can do. And then the next day I'll just get some more of it done. And still, you know, I still have my job that pays the bills. So, you know, it's finding time for both. It's holding space for both and not getting lost in it. I do recommend finding a DAO that's smaller. I think that's been a huge difference. Like with Journo DAO, it's very small. It's at its inception. I think it's been around since November, October. So that helps you get into being an active participant without a lot of barriers. Like I just recently joined another DAO, just for like a paid writing gig, and it's very. I don't even know where to start. It's so overwhelming. Like I have to be on calls actually later today and tomorrow, and I'm like, y'all just need to hand hold me through this because they've got a great infrastructure set up, but it is very complex. Whereas with smaller DAOs, it's very organic. It's very much, hey, can you do this? Yes, I can. Perfect. Here you go.
Well, also I feel like the more established bigger DAOs like maybe just won't have space for you. I've noticed that in the last 6 months or so, those doors have been closed.
Oh, sweet little furry things.
I gotta deal with her. Hang on.
Oh, no worries. Oh, look at her.
She wants out. Her name
Oh,
is Zoe. Come here.
Zoe.
All right. So on each show, I like to have the guest do a recommendation, and of course, I have to slip my own in too. Um, so Crystal, you have Yoga Ram Dass and Alan Watts written down here. So what's the thrust of your recommendation?
For yoga, it would be just any practice. Find a yoga studio, a gym, a rec center. It doesn't have to be physical yoga. Like restorative yoga is amazing. There's a thing called yoga nidra, it's basically like adult napping, and it's fantastic. So find a type of yoga style that fits what you need, and try to make that a regular occurrence, even if it's just something you end up doing with YouTube for 20 minutes a day. Eventually, it brings stillness and calm into this chaotic world that we're in. So that's my recommendation for that. Ram Dass is more of a he's something I'm studying with school. He also led or started the first yoga class, started our yoga program at the university that I go to, and basically him and Timothy Leary explored psychedelics in the 60s, the 50s and 60s from a psychotherapy perspective. So they're the ones that are leading that research that is now relevant again. They did the research originally, and then he went to India and found a guru, and then incorporated yoga and found that meditation gave him the type of higher consciousness he was looking for through psychedelics. So he was able to pause the psychedelics and step into meditation in a way that allowed him to find that level of consciousness that he was seeking. But his lectures are very human. They're really fun to listen to. He's got that New York accent too, but it puts a lot of spirituality into a very human container, which I think makes it more accessible. I know it does for me. He talks about being a messy human while also being on a spiritual path and holding space for both. which I think is really important, because sometimes when people go down a spiritual path, it's all or nothing. And at the end of the day, we're still functioning in this world that we're functioning in. And we need to bring that level of awareness and consciousness into our communities, our families, our friends. And we do that through human interaction. So podcasts, one of his books, Be Here Now, is also the name of the podcast. um, just watched a documentary again last night called Becoming Nobody. It's a really good introduction. It's a long interview at the end of his life, but they splice it with his lectures throughout, because he was a lecturer throughout his whole life. And then Alan Watts. I'm a big counterculture person, so I first found Alan Watts in the '90s, and he was a poet and writer. Wrote a lot of Zen Buddhism and really helped make Zen more mainstream. So I would, and he's the one you usually find on YouTube, where his lectures are spliced together with these really cool, B-roll of humanity. It's usually him.
Sure.
Yeah.
We've seen those.
Yes.
Well, so I'm sorry, the best way to like access his work?
Any of his books, and I don't have Zen. Oh, I can't remember the name of the books off the top of my head. But just
Okay.
Google Alan Watts. I mean, he's got a gazillion of them.
Sure.
YouTube, search Alan Watts. I actually like to pull up his. I've got Apple TV and I'll at my house, and I'll pull up some Alan Watts lectures every once in a while and just go there. So that's probably the best starting point is YouTube.
The
And
Alan Watts
also
app.
the Be Here Now podcast has, I think they've started tapping into his archives of his lectures, and they have them in podcast form. And same with Ram Dass. They're both really good to listen to in podcast form. They're about 40 minutes long.
For sure. Check the show notes for that stuff. I will definitely look that up for that and his books and such. So my recommendation this week is a little bit different than the books I've been recommending over the last few weeks. It's Sobriety. Now bear with me here. I know. This isn't fun. But we need to talk about this. On the 28th of this month, I'm hitting my 2 year of not having any alcohol. And I think when a lot of us are honest with ourselves, our relationship with alcohol especially isn't maybe so healthy. So for me, it was the sort of I was one of those drinkers that every night at like 4 to 6 p.m. I would pour myself a glass of wine and then continue to pour glasses of wine until I went to bed. And that in a vacuum isn't a horrible night, but when it's every night and when the months go by and when the years go by, it's bad in a couple ways. First of all, because you are relying on it to you. Looking back, I used alcohol to sort of hide in, because once I started drinking each night, it was this sort of thing where I didn't have to think about my problems. I didn't have to think about the things I needed to fix in my life and stuff like that. It was just sort of like the whole evening was a write-off, basically. And I would play games or watch YouTube videos or whatever. And then, I would do the whole thing the next day. But also, it's just hell on your body. If you think about what alcohol is and what it does to you physically, and then you're just saturating yourself with it for like a third to a half the hours of the day, it's not healthy. And when you have all these other health goals, like I would still go to the gym the next morning, and I was always wonder to myself, like, how am I handicapping myself by sort of doing this every night? And it really was every night. And I would always ask myself, like, do I plan on doing this forever? Like, is that the plan? And the answer was always no. So eventually I got to a point where I was like, well, just today's the day. I just need to stop doing this and kind of move on with my life. And thankfully, I was never the type of drinker that was like, I mean, we've all known like real hard drinkers that, like they wake up with a fifth of vodka they, and that's just their life. I was not that person. So it was maybe a bit easier for me to move on. Um, but yeah, it's like I said, it's been almost 2 years, and it's I don't think about it. It's not a problem, and I have more time now to do what I want to do. My health is a lot better. It's yeah. Honestly, I think of alcohol as this. It's this sort of virus that lives in our society that just sort of like saps our health and energy and doesn't really give us much back. Um, every once in a while, I'll see a story on the news and like I'll think like, wow, you know, clearly this wouldn't have happened if one or all of these people weren't wasted in some way, shape, or form, and that includes a lot of violence and a lot of like interpersonal strife that we put ourselves and each other through. Um, and sitting where I am, like outside of it, it all starts to seem really silly. Um, anyway, I could go on, but I recommend sobriety. Look, if you drink now and then, whatever, it's fine. But for me, what I was doing to my days and my body, I didn't think it was healthy. So maybe this recommendation would be a good time for you, the listener, to look at how your relationship with alcohol and ask yourself honestly if you think it's a healthy relationship, and if not, maybe think about doing something about it. So that wasn't so bad.
No, that was good. That was a beautiful share. Something that popped into my mind as you were talking. It's something we study in yoga, and this is really it gets to the heart of a lot of yogic studies. I study tantric yoga specifically, and in tantra, there's a and in most yoga, there's a philosophical belief that your afflictive emotions are what you're meant to work with. So when those emotions arise, I know for me sometimes that's when I'll go grab a glass of wine. I'm like, oh, it's been a day. Go get a glass of wine,
I need a drink.
right?
Yeah.
So, and hey, it happens. So learning to deal with those afflictive emotions and letting them sit for a minute. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If we let them sit and acknowledge them, that's where the learning is. That's where the growth is not pushing it away or numbing it or pushing it out. It's in bringing it in and embracing it and say, all right, today I'm feeling this emotion and this is what I have to work with today. And I'm just going to sit with it, as messy as that's going to be, as emotional as that's going to be. And I'm giving myself permission to sit with this today, and then tomorrow I'll sit with something else. Um, yeah.
Right, because if you don't give yourself that opportunity, maybe you never learn how to deal with that type of emotion. Or yeah, I it was definitely a problem for me. Not that it yeah.
It's a problem for most, and that's what, like you were saying, that's where we get into these, these traumas that are left undealt with, and we can just look at society right now in general and see so much emotion. I mean, most of what we're in right now is the result of pushing emotion away and not dealing with trauma as it happens. It's small, little t trauma, big T trauma. And that's really at the heart of a lot of these ancient wisdom traditions, is not ignoring the emotion itself and what caused it, what it feels like, um, and dealing with it so that it doesn't manifest in some other numbing, doom scrolling. That's a great one. I do that all the time. It's a numbing, it's a distraction. So we all have our distractions and our numbing tools.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely I need to listen to some Ram Dass for
Oh,
sure.
yes. I'll send some good
Um,
recommends. Mhm.
some beginner stuff, hopefully.
Yeah.
Um, I think people say this about Web3 and DAOs a lot, and it's been totally true for me. But like, you know how people will say things like, the real thing you learn in Web3 and DAOs is personal development. Like you start to recognize like all the sort of like blind spots you have in how you interact with people and stuff. And for me, it's definitely been making me confront a lot of the ways I deal with people,
Mhm.
because I don't know, I was always uh, the type of person that uh like would say something mildly offensive, um and not realize it. You know, like I would say a joke because I thought the person would understand it was a joke, and they wouldn't get it because like this might shock you, but my humor can be a bit dry sometimes. um I guess that was a good example. So especially people I've just met would just be like, oh, this guy's an asshole. uh and like I would never accept that. I would always be like, oh no, they're just it is the kids who are wrong, you know. um but like I've at some point, you got, at least I've been asking myself, like, okay, what do I get by offending people? Like nothing, you know. Like all I get is to be pushed aside, and to not have a new friend, or whatever it may be, or to have an uncomfortable relationship at work. Like it can be many, many different things, um, and that's not the goal. Um, so like it makes more sense to find those like hard edges, and kind of file them down to a point where I can get the things I want out of life, you know.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. I mean, DAOs and just public good perspective, impact DAOs, like coming at it from the collective perspective. Um, it's no longer about separation; it's about unity, and that's really again all these issues we're seeing in our society really does come from polarization and separation. And if we're able to step over into collective action, which is what DAOs are based on, then we begin to see the person across from us not as a separate person, but as ourselves. And that gets into the spiritual stuff as well. Like we're all just souls on our human journey. And if we're able to find that collective meeting place, then we can make action happen in a more holistic way. Whereas in separation, polarization, we see the results of that. And we're definitely not done with that in our society because a large portion of society just isn't ready to see the person next to them as a soul as well. And that's our own karma. We're on this planet at this time to help navigate that because that's our karmic journey. So,
Yeah, how do you feel about, I mean, with especially, you know, like environmental action, DAOs, you know, climate, biodiversity, and stuff like that? uh, they have a pretty uphill battle with convincing the traditional sort of um, you know, nonprofit space that we're part of the team. You know what I mean? Because
yeah.
like a lot of people in that sort of line of work look at crypto as this, you know, thing that proof of work happens in, and thus is part of the problem. So I've heard a lot of stories from people that are, you know, in refi and stuff like that, that are just like sometimes you're afraid to tell people
Mm.
that
Yeah.
you're doing something like this, because you know, like you might get like a vitriolic reaction
Mhm.
that's just not like they're not going to listen. They're just like, like what? No, not my thing. So hopefully we can figure that out.
I think a lot of it comes down to language, meeting the person where they're at. So what I've found, because I'm definitely, we deal with this with Journo DAO. Journalists are do not want to hear about blockchain. So like just this morning, I was talking with one of my mentors, and he's very open to it. I explained it to him. He's in his 70s. I explained it to him over coffee last summer, and he's out taking notes. He's like, "Oh, okay, let me look at this." And we were talking today about some of the content on one of the projects he helped build a community newspaper. That's his specialty, is community news. And the content was living on a server that he was worried about access. He's like, I'm just grateful that the person that had this server didn't shut it down. And I said, well, that's actually what we do at Journal DAO. That's one of our core points, is protecting the data and making it decentralized. And then he just lit up. He already was in it. He already wasn't not in it, but he was open to the conversation. But when you put it in that context, then it matters. And so what I found, especially at a Buddhism school, everything's about your impact on everyone else. So I really have to enter this conversation lightly. But I've actually been very surprised at the students want to talk about it. They want to know, and I was shocked. Some will ask me about the environmental impact, so I'll give them some very tiny little talking points, but I'll use a comparison of 100,000 Visa transactions and how much power that uses, as opposed to 100,000 Ethereum transactions and how much power that uses. And when you lay those out in numbers, people are like, oh. And then they're like, you don't realize, like, the servers that we use at school to communicate with and store all of our data use a ton of power. So everything you're using is power consumption, and that's the conversation we need to have. But then if I can frame blockchain and DAOs and Web3 to address the pain point of the person that I'm talking to, then it is a much more mutual conversation than trying to shove technology at them from the get-go. And then unwinding the media narrative that mass media produced around the environment and why that happened. That's also, especially to journalists, that's an easy sell.
Yeah, one thing I tell people, because like for me, the crypto and technology is not number one why I'm here in Web3. It's because I see a bunch of passionate people that want to make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's almost like the crypto stuff is almost like beside the point, you know. It's not, but like that. So when I first realized that, I was like, okay, this is somewhere I definitely want to be. Um, and that's also how I explain it to people. And
Mm-hmm.
it's hard because like you can't see the DAO space from the outside.
Yeah.
Like all our talk about coordination and stuff like that. Like people hear about Dogecoin and Bitcoin, and like they don't. It's kind of like a dark corner almost, right? At least for now, of Web3. So yeah, I mean that's why I'm here. And if I get some tokens along the way, that's great, and some NFTs.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Airdrops are nice. But yeah, I totally agree. Like it's revitalized my technology. It's taking me away from the rocks and back into the technology. Is the passionate people that are using this technology to at least try to solve problems. I mean, none of it's all experimental. DAOs are a hot mess. I mean, for the most part, governance in this capacity is a hot ass mess. But I want to be part of that hot ass mess so I can help make it better, so that in 15 to 20 years, when my niece goes to use technology, it'll be good for her. Like, she'll be able to use blockchain in a way that has equanimity built into it, hopefully, you know?
absolutely. Well, I think maybe we should wrap things up. So I hmm, so one of the reasons I had Crystal on today was because she will probably be showing up in this feed very soon because we are working together on a Impact DAO project with Deepa. Not sure of her last name, at Deepa Rocks on Twitter. So we might be doing some interviews together and stuff like that. So yeah. But yeah, thank you so much, Crystal. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's been an awesome conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast. I'm excited about our path forward too with this project, for sure.